Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through time to experience something that will challenge everything you think you know about ancient worship. Picture this. You're about to enter one of humanity's most sacred spaces, an Egyptian temple. But here's the thing that might surprise you. You're not just visiting a peaceful place of prayer. You're entering what was essentially a cosmic power plant, a divine corporation, and, quite frankly, a place where you probably won't survive if you break the wrong rule. What draws you across 3,000 years isn't just curiosity. It's the need to understand how our ancestors built structures so magnificent that they still leave modern engineers scratching their heads. Through 15 sections tonight, you'll discover why these temples weren't just buildings, but living, breathing ecosystems of faith, politics, and human ambition. You'll witness rituals that determine the fate of empires, meet priests who wielded more power than kings, and uncover secrets that archaeologists are still debating today. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your world. I love seeing our global community come together for these journeys. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun beats down mercilessly as you trudge across endless dunes, each step sinking slightly into sand that seems determined to swallow your sandals. Your water skin hangs nearly empty at your hip, and the linen wrapped around your head provides little relief from the relentless Egyptian heat. Just when you begin to wonder if this pilgrimage was a terrible mistake, something impossible materializes through the shimmering heat waves ahead. At first, you think it's another mirage, your sun-addled brain playing tricks after hours of monotonous desert travel. But as you continue forward, squinting against the glare, the vision solidifies into reality. Rising from the sand like a mountain crafted by gods themselves stands the temple complex of Karnak, its massive stone pylons piercing the sky with an authority that makes your knees nearly buckle. The first thing that strikes you isn't the size, though the sheer scale defies comprehension. It's the deliberate intimidation. This isn't architecture designed to welcome. It's a statement of divine power that could crush you without a second thought. The entrance pylons tower nearly 140 feet above your head, wider than a modern city block. Their surfaces covered in carved hieroglyphs that seem to writhe in the dancing heat. You pause at the edge of the temple's shadow, grateful for even this small respite from the sun's assault. From here, you can make out processions of carved figures marching across the stone walls. Pharaohs presenting offerings to gods, divine barks sailing through celestial waters, and scenes of cosmic battles between order and chaos. The craftsmanship is so intricate that individual feathers can be distinguished on the wings of carved falcons, each detail chiseled with a precision that speaks of decades of devoted labor. Historians still argue whether these massive temple complexes were primarily religious centers or elaborate propaganda machines designed to reinforce pharaonic authority. What's undeniable is their effectiveness. Even today, standing in their shadow, you feel simultaneously awed and insignificant. The approach causeway stretches before you, flanked by twin rows of ram-headed sphinxes. Each sphinx bears the same serene expression, their stone eyes seeming to track your movement as you walk between them. These aren't merely decorative. They're guardians, divine sentinels whose presence transforms your simple walk into a processional march toward the sacred. Your footsteps echo strangely in the corridor they create, as if the stone itself amplifies and judges each sound. As you draw closer to the main entrance, details emerge that speak to the temple's role as more than just a place of worship. Vendors cluster near the outer walls, selling offerings, amulets, and sacred oils to pilgrims. The air fills with the competing scents of frankincense, myrrh, and less pleasant odors from the crowds of people who've traveled vast distances to reach this place. Children dart between the adults, some begging, others simply overwhelmed by the spectacle. Here's something that might surprise you. The ancient Egyptians invented what we'd recognize today as religious tourism. People traveled hundreds of miles to visit major temples, creating entire industries around pilgrimage. The temple complexes employed thousands: priests, scribes, craftsmen, guards, cooks, cleaners, and countless others who kept these massive operations running. Karnak alone owned nearly 2,400 square miles of agricultural land and employed over 80,000 people at its peak. The sound hits you before you fully process what you're seeing. A deep, rhythmic chanting drifts from somewhere within the temple complex, occasionally punctuated by the clash of sistrum rattles and the hollow boom of ceremonial drums. It's a sound that seems to emerge from the stone itself, as if the temple breathes and sings with a life of its own. You notice other pilgrims gathering at the entrance, some prostrating themselves on the ground, others raising their hands in gestures of reverence. A group of women ululate in celebration. Perhaps they've received favorable omens or successfully completed long-promised vows. Their joy contrasts sharply with the solemn expressions of others who approach the temple with obvious trepidation. Standing here at the threshold between the mundane world of sand and sun and the sacred realm beyond, you realize you're about to cross more than just a physical boundary. You're stepping from the world where humans struggle against nature into a space where gods supposedly dwell among mortals, where cosmic forces are channeled through ritual and stone, and where your very presence is both welcomed and scrutinized by powers beyond comprehension. The massive entrance pylons loom directly overhead now, and you crane your neck until it aches trying to take in their full height. These aren't just walls. They're vertical textbooks of divine propaganda, every square inch carved with hieroglyphic declarations that would make modern political campaign managers weep with envy. The stone surface feels alive under the desert sun, shadows shifting constantly across the carved reliefs as Ra's chariot moves across the sky. Your eyes struggle to process the sheer volume of information carved into these walls. Pharaohs the size of giants stride across the stone, their conquered enemies reduced to tiny figures cowering beneath royal feet. Gods present ink symbols of life to kings while defeated foreign rulers literally lick the dust. The message couldn't be clearer. This is a place where divine power flows through earthly authority, and if you're not on the right side of that equation, well, you might want to reconsider your travel plans. Here's a detail that most visitors miss. Look closely at the carved hieroglyphs, and you'll notice they're not all the same depth. The most sacred names, those of gods and pharaohs, are carved deepest, while the names of enemies are sometimes carved backwards or upside down, a deliberate insult that was believed to weaken their power, even in carved form. Ancient Egyptian graffiti artists had nothing on these professional stone trolls. As you move closer to examine the carvings, a peculiar detail catches your attention. Some hieroglyphs appear to have been deliberately chiseled away, leaving smooth patches in otherwise perfect text. These aren't signs of damage. They're evidence of damnatio memoriae, the systematic erasure of pharaohs who fell from favor. Imagine being so thoroughly canceled that your enemies literally chisel your name out of stone for all eternity. Even our modern social media pylons seem gentle by comparison. A particularly impressive scene depicts the pharaoh Ramesses II single-handedly slaughtering hundreds of enemies at the Battle of Kadesh, a military engagement that historical records suggest was actually more of a strategic draw than the decisive victory these walls proclaim. But accuracy was never the point. These carved proclamations served as both divine validation and not-so-subtle warnings to anyone who might challenge pharaonic authority. The entrance itself is a marvel of engineering psychology. The doorway is proportioned to make every human passing through feel appropriately diminished. You have to tilt your head back to see the lintel overhead, where carved solar discs spread protective wings across the threshold. It's impossible to enter without adopting a posture of reverence, or at least getting a serious crick in your neck. Flanking the entrance stand colossal statues of the pharaoh, each one carved from single blocks of granite that were quarried hundreds of miles away and somehow transported to this spot using techniques that still puzzle modern engineers. The king's expression is serene but stern, eyes gazing eternally toward the horizon with the confidence of someone who genuinely believes he's a living god. The sculptor has captured that particular look of supreme authority mixed with divine madness that seems to come with absolute power. But here's where things get interesting and slightly menacing. Carved into the base of these statues are lists of conquered peoples and cities, their names literally crushed beneath the pharaoh's feet for eternity. Some of these lists include places that never actually existed, mythical lands added to make the king's conquest seem even more impressive. Ancient fake news carved in granite. Historians still argue whether these entrance monuments were designed primarily to impress visitors or to intimidate potential enemies who might see them. The answer is probably both. Ancient Egyptians were nothing if not efficient with their propaganda. Why choose between inspiring awe and inspiring terror when you can do both simultaneously? As you approach the actual doorway, you notice something that sends a slight chill down your spine despite the desert heat. The shadows cast by the pylons create an area of relative coolness, but they also seem to muffle sound in an unsettling way. Conversations that were perfectly audible in the bright sunlight become whispered and indistinct once you step into the temple's shadow. It's as if the building itself demands a more reverent tone from anyone who dares to approach. The stone beneath your feet changes texture as you near the entrance. The rough-hewn blocks of the outer area give way to precisely fitted stones, so perfectly joined that you couldn't slip a knife blade between them. Each block was individually carved and fitted by master craftsmen who spent their entire careers perfecting techniques passed down through generations. The result is a surface so smooth it almost feels alive under your sandals. Looking up one final time before entering, you notice details that would be invisible from ground level if not for your current vantage point. Hidden among the more obvious carvings are smaller scenes. Priests performing secret rituals, sacred animals in procession, astronomical symbols marking important celestial events. These weren't carved for human viewers, but for the gods themselves, divine audiences who presumably had better sight lines than mortal pilgrims. The entrance threshold is marked by a subtle but significant change in the stone. You're about to step from profane space into sacred territory, from the realm where humans struggle with earthly concerns into a domain where cosmic forces operate according to divine law. The carved warnings flanking the doorway make it clear that this transition comes with serious responsibilities and potentially fatal consequences for those who fail to show proper respect. A hot wind gusts across the desert, stirring dust devils in the distance and causing the fabric of your clothing to snap against your skin. But as you stand at this threshold, you realize that the wind doesn't penetrate into the temple shadow. The air here is still, almost expectant, as if the building itself holds its breath waiting to see whether you're worthy to enter its sacred precincts. The moment you step across the threshold, everything changes. The blazing desert heat gives way to cool stone shadows, and the chaotic sounds of the outside world fade to a respectful murmur. But before you can fully appreciate this relief, you're confronted by figures that make your heart skip a beat. Temple guards whose job it is to separate the genuinely pious from the merely curious, the ritually pure from the spiritually contaminated. These are your friendly neighborhood security guards. Temple priests serving as gatekeepers wear crisp white linen robes that somehow remain spotless despite the dusty environment, their shaved heads gleaming with scented oils that catch the filtered light streaming through high windows. Their eyes hold the particular intensity of people who genuinely believe they're protecting divine property from mortal contamination. The lead priest approaches with measured steps, his bronze-tipped staff clicking against the stone floor in a rhythm that seems calculated to increase your nervousness. His gaze sweeps over you with professional assessment, taking in details you didn't even know were significant. The way you hold your shoulders, the cleanliness of your hands, the direction of your gaze. Every gesture is being evaluated for signs of proper reverence or dangerous disrespect. State your purpose. He commands in accented Egyptian, though something in his tone suggests this is more test than simple inquiry. The question hangs in the incense-heavy air while you scramble to remember the proper formulaic responses that your guides taught you during the long journey here. Get this wrong, and your temple visit could end before it properly begins. Here's something that might surprise you about ancient Egyptian religious practice. Temple entry wasn't automatic, even for believers. Different areas of the temple complex had different purity requirements, and priests served as ritual quality control. Determining who could proceed were based on complex regulations that governed everything from recent dietary choices to the phase of the moon. Think of it as ancient religious security clearance, except the penalties for violation were considerably more severe than losing your government job. You stammer out the required phrases about seeking the God's blessing and offering proper devotion, all while trying not to stare too obviously at the priest's elaborately painted eyes. The coal liner isn't just decorative. It serves practical purposes in this bright climate while also invoking divine protection. But the overall effect is deeply unsettling, especially when those painted eyes narrow in assessment of your spiritual worthiness. Behind a lead priest, other temple personnel watch your interaction with obvious interest. Some wear the simple white kilts of junior clergy, while others sport the elaborate leopard skin cloaks that mark them as sempriests, specialists in mortuary rituals whose presence suggests this temple handles more than just daily worship. The hierarchy is immediately obvious from clothing, posture, and the deference shown by subordinates. The interrogation continues with increasingly specific questions about your ritual state. When did you last eat meat? Have you touched a corpse recently? Are you currently menstruating? The questions are asked matter-of-factly, but your answers are clearly being weighed for their impact on your spiritual cleanliness. Ancient Egyptian religion operated on the principle that divine and mortal realms required careful separation to maintain cosmic order. Historians still argue whether these purity regulations were primarily spiritual requirements or clever social control mechanisms that allowed priests to regulate temple access based on class, gender, and economic status. The practical effect was the same. Temple entry became a privilege that could be granted or denied based on criteria that ordinary people couldn't always predict or control. Incense smoke drifts between you and the priests, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that make their expressions even harder to read. The scent is overwhelming, a complex mixture of frankincense, myrrh, and other aromatics that probably cost more than most people earn in a year. Even the air here announces that you've entered a realm where normal economic rules don't apply. One of the junior priests steps forward, carrying what appears to be a ceremonial washing basin made of polished bronze. The surface reflects distorted images of the surrounding architecture, creating a disorienting kaleidoscope effect that makes you feel slightly dizzy. This isn't just a practical cleaning station. It's part of the ritual transformation required to move from profane to sacred space. Cleanse your hands and mouth, the priest instructs, offering you a small cup of water that has probably been blessed according to formulas you couldn't pronounce. The water tastes faintly metallic and carries an herb flavor you can't identify. As you drink, you notice the priest watching your face carefully, perhaps looking for signs of divine approval or rejection. The cleansing ritual serves multiple purposes beyond simple hygiene. By participating in these prescribed actions, you're demonstrating submission to temple authority while also undergoing symbolic transformation from ordinary person to temporary temple participant. Every step reinforces the hierarchy that places divine authority above human will. But here's where things get interesting from an anthropological perspective. These entrance rituals weren't just about excluding the unworthy. They also served to psychologically prepare visitors for the extraordinary experience ahead. By creating barriers and requirements, the priests were actually increasing the perceived value of temple access. Modern marketing psychology has nothing on ancient Egyptian religious manipulation. As you complete the required purifications, you notice other pilgrims waiting their turn for similar questioning. Some appear confident and familiar with the requirements, while others seem as nervous as you feel. A wealthy-looking woman, surrounded by servants, breezes through the process with barely a pause, while a humble farmer endures much more intensive scrutiny. The temple's egalitarian spiritual message clearly comes with some very practical exceptions. The lead priest finally nods approvingly and steps aside, but not before delivering a final warning that chills your already cool skin. Remember, he says quietly, the gods see everything within these walls. What you think, what you desire, what you fear, all is known here. Proceed with reverence, or do not proceed at all. The outer courtyard hits you like a sensory sledgehammer after the controlled environment of the entrance examination. This isn't the serene temple space you might have imagined. It's more like a religious marketplace crossed with a county fair, if county fairs included divine intervention and the occasional miraculous healing. The noise alone is overwhelming. Vendors hawking sacred amulets, pilgrims calling out prayers, children shrieking as they chase sacred cats, and underneath it all, the constant background hum of hundreds of conversations in a dozen different languages. You're swept immediately into a river of humanity that flows in seemingly random patterns around the courtyard's perimeter. Farmers from the Delta mingle with Nubian merchants, their dark skin gleaming with perspiration as they navigate through crowds that part reluctantly before their exotic appearance. Wealthy Memphite ladies clutch the hands of their children while trying to keep their elaborate wigs properly positioned despite the jostling crowd. Everyone here wants something from the gods, and they're not particularly patient about waiting their turn. The architecture of this space seems designed to accommodate chaos rather than prevent it. Massive columns support a roof that provides blessed shade, while allowing enough open space for the crowds to circulate without creating deadly bottlenecks. But the acoustics are probably an unintentional nightmare. Every sound bounces off the stone surfaces and amplifies until the overall effect resembles controlled pandemonium. Here's something that might shatter your preconceptions about ancient religious practice. Egyptian temples weren't quiet, contemplative spaces like modern churches or libraries. They were bustling commercial and social centers that served their communities in ways that would make modern megachurches look restrained. Think of it as ancient Amazon combined with divine customer service, except the customer service representatives claimed direct access to cosmic powers. A vendor grabs your arm with practiced familiarity, immediately launching into a sales pitch for protective amulets that he swears were blessed by the high priest himself just this morning. His inventory is impressive. Scarab beetles carved from various stones, Ankh symbols in different metals, tiny statues of protective deities, and small scrolls covered with hieroglyphic formulas that supposedly ward off everything from scorpion stings to tax collectors. The prices he quotes are astronomical, but you notice other pilgrims paying without much haggling. Apparently, divine protection follows standard market economics. The crowd swirls around several focal points that draw particular attention. Near the eastern wall, a group has gathered around what appears to be a minor miracle in progress. A woman whose chronic illness is supposedly being cured through the application of sacred oils and vigorous prayer. Whether the cure is genuine or theatrical hardly matters to the observers, who press forward eagerly hoping some divine favor might spill over onto their own ailments. Children weave through the crowd with the fearless confidence of those who haven't yet learned proper reverence for divine authority. Some are obviously street kids working the crowd for loose coins, but others appear to be temple-raised, their shaved heads and simple linen garments marking them as junior clergy in training. These temple children move through the chaos with practiced ease, somehow avoiding the adults who seem perpetually on the verge of trampling anything smaller than knee-high. Historians still argue whether these crowded courtyards represented genuine religious devotion or simply provided convenient gathering spaces for communities that lacked other public venues. The truth is probably both. Religious and social functions were so intertwined in ancient Egypt that separating them would have seemed artificial to contemporary participants. The beggars here operate with a sophistication that would impress modern fundraising professionals. Rather than simple pleas for charity, they offer specific services: prayers for your deceased relatives, curses for your enemies, or intercession with particular deities known for their effectiveness in certain situations. One elderly woman claims special influence with Tarit, the hippo goddess of childbirth, and has attracted a small cluster of obviously pregnant customers who hang on her every word. But the real spectacle unfolds near the offering tables, where pilgrims present gifts intended to curry divine favor. The variety is staggering. Fresh bread still warm from bakery ovens, beer in specially decorated jars, flowers that must have cost fortunes to transport across the desert, and occasionally livestock that adds its own aromatic contribution to the courtyard's complex perfume. The priests managing these offerings move with assembly line efficiency, sorting gifts by value and presumably divine preference. Food vendors have established themselves in every available corner, creating an ancient fast food court that serves the spiritual equivalent of comfort food. You can buy honey cakes shaped like sacred animals, beer flavored with herbs that supposedly enhance prayer effectiveness, or dried fish that has been blessed by priests who specialize in riverine deities. The prices are inflated, but hungry pilgrims who've traveled long distances don't have many alternatives. The social dynamics playing out around you would fascinate any anthropologist. Class distinctions that might be subtle elsewhere become glaringly obvious in this religious context. Wealthy visitors are accompanied by servants who carry elaborate offerings and clear paths through the crowds, while poor pilgrims clutch single flowers or small loaves of bread, their offerings humble but clearly significant given their obvious economic circumstances. A commotion near the western colonnade draws your attention to what appears to be a dispute between pilgrims from different regions. Heated words and dialects you can't follow suggest that even religious devotion doesn't eliminate political tensions between Egypt's various territories. Temple guards move quickly to separate the arguing parties before divine displeasure can be triggered by violence in sacred space. As you navigate through this controlled chaos, you begin to understand that the outer courtyard serves as more than just a waiting area. It's a pressure release valve that allows the community to blow off steam while maintaining the fiction of religious propriety. By the time pilgrims reach the inner sanctums, they've had opportunities to socialize, argue, shop, eat, and generally satisfy most of their non-spiritual needs, leaving them theoretically ready for purely religious experiences. The sacred lake appears suddenly as you round a corner of the colonnade, its dark water reflecting the morning sky like a mirror dropped into the stone courtyard. This isn't some decorative fountain. It's a carefully engineered marvel that serves as the temple's spiritual heart, fed by underground channels connected to the Nile and maintained at precise levels by priests who understand hydraulics in ways that would impress modern engineers. The site stops you mid-step, partly from aesthetic appreciation and partly from the realization that you're witnessing something genuinely sacred in a place where commerce and spirituality blend so seamlessly it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. The priests gathered at the water's edge for dawn purification rituals move with a choreographed precision that speaks to centuries of refined practice. Their white linen garments seem to glow in the early light, creating an almost ethereal effect as they wade into water that reaches their thighs. Each movement is deliberate, meaningful, part of a complex ceremony that maintains cosmic balance by ensuring the temple's clergy remains spiritually clean enough to serve as intermediaries between human and divine realms. Here's something that might surprise you about ancient Egyptian religious practice. These purification rituals weren't just symbolic gestures. They were based on sophisticated understanding of the connections between physical cleanliness and spiritual authority. Priests bathed multiple times daily, shaved their entire bodies every few days, and wore only linen clothing because wool came from animals and was therefore considered spiritually contaminating. They essentially invented the concept of religious hygiene standards. You watch, mesmerized, as the senior priest raises his arms toward the rising sun and begins a chant that seems to emerge from the water itself. His voice carries clearly across the lake's surface, each syllable pronounced with the careful precision of someone who believes that mispronouncing sacred words could literally upset cosmic order. The other priests join in at precisely timed intervals, creating a harmonic effect that makes your skin prickle with something that might be reverence or might just be the desert morning's residual chill. Sacred ibises wade through the shallows at the lake's far end, their curved beaks probing the mud for small fish and insects. These aren't wild birds that happen to be here. They're deliberately maintained temple animals whose presence adds another layer of religious significance to the morning ceremonies. In Egyptian theology, ibises are associated with Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, so their participation in dawn rituals serves as divine endorsement of the priest's activities. The water itself tells a fascinating story about ancient engineering capabilities. This lake isn't fed by rain or surface runoff. It's connected to the Nile through underground channels that maintain water levels regardless of seasonal fluctuations. The construction required mathematical precision and hydraulic knowledge that challenges assumptions about ancient technological limitations. Modern archaeologists are still figuring out exactly how these systems worked, and some of the techniques appear to have been lost when the temple complexes were abandoned. Other pilgrims have gathered at respectful distances around the lake's perimeter, some prostrating themselves on the stone paving, others simply standing in silent observation. A few hold small offerings, flowers, bread, tiny statues, that they'll presumably present once the formal ceremonies conclude. The atmosphere is considerably more reverent than the chaotic marketplace of the outer courtyard, as if proximity to this sacred water automatically elevates human behavior. But here's where ancient Egyptian religion gets beautifully complex. The same water being used for purification rituals also serves practical temple functions. Fish raised in the sacred lake provide protein for the priestly community. Irrigation channels feed temple gardens, and the lake serves as a fire safety reservoir during the dry season. Sacred and practical purposes intertwine so completely that separating them would probably seem artificial to ancient observers. Historians still argue whether these dawn ceremonies were primarily spiritual exercises or elaborate theatrical performances designed to reinforce priestly authority in the eyes of watching pilgrims. The answer is probably both. Ancient Egyptian religion operated on multiple levels simultaneously, serving spiritual, political, and social functions that modern minds struggle to integrate. A young priest wades closer to where you're standing, water streaming from his linen kilt as he emerges from the lake. His shaved head glistens with droplets that catch the strengthening sunlight, and his expression holds the particular serenity of someone who's just completed a profound spiritual exercise. But when he notices your obvious foreign appearance, his serene expression shifts to curiosity mixed with professional wariness. You've traveled far to witness the morning purification, he observes in Greek-accented Egyptian, apparently assuming you're from one of the trading communities that regularly visit Egyptian temples. His tone is friendly, but carries an undertone of evaluation. Temple personnel are clearly trained to assess visitors for everything from sincere piety to potential troublemaking. The conversation that follows reveals layers of complexity in temple operations that most casual visitors never glimpse. This young priest, barely old enough to need regular shaving, demonstrates encyclopedic knowledge of religious law, hydraulic engineering, astronomical calculations, and diplomatic protocols for dealing with foreign pilgrims. Egyptian temple education produced individuals who combined religious devotion with practical expertise in ways that would impress modern university administrators. As the formal ceremonies conclude and the priests begin withdrawing from the sacred lake, you notice details that speak to the sophistication of these daily rituals. The timing isn't arbitrary. Everything is calculated to align with astronomical events, seasonal cycles, and the temple's complex religious calendar. The movements aren't improvised. They follow patterns that have been refined over generations to maximize both spiritual effectiveness and aesthetic impact. The sacred ibises seem to understand that ceremony time is ending. They begin moving toward feeding areas where temple servants scatter grain and small fish. Their movements as precisely timed as the priest's activities. Even the birds participate in temple schedule, trained through generations of careful management to enhance rather than disrupt religious observances. Water continues to lap gently against the lake's stone edges as normal temple activities resume around its perimeter. Servants appear with bronze buckets to collect water for various sacred purposes. Gardeners check irrigation channels that feed temple agricultural areas, and maintenance workers inspect the complex system of drains and filters that keep the sacred water clean enough for religious use. The transition from sacred ceremony to practical maintenance happens so smoothly, it's almost imperceptible. The transition from the sacred lake's serene ceremonies to the great hypostyle hall hits you like stepping into a stone forest designed by gods with serious architectural ambitions. 134 columns rise around you like petrified trees from some primordial forest, each one massive enough to require 20 people holding hands to encircle its base. The scale is so overwhelming that your brain initially refuses to process what you're seeing. This isn't architecture in any sense you understand. It's geology manipulated by divine will and human stubbornness. The columns aren't uniform, which somehow makes them even more impressive. The 12 central pillars tower 70 feet overhead, their papyrus bundle capitals spreading like stone flowers against a ceiling that seems impossibly distant. The remaining columns, merely 60 feet tall, as if merely has any meaning in this context, create a maze of stone that stretches in every direction until the far walls disappear into shadow. Walking between them feels like navigating through the leg bones of sleeping giants who might wake up at any moment and take offense at your presumption. Light filters down through clear-story windows cut high in the central nave, creating cathedral-like effects that won't be replicated in European architecture for another 2,000 years. The beams of sunlight slice through incense, smoke, and dust motes, painting columns in alternating bands of gold and shadow that shift continuously as the sun tracks across the sky. It's impossible to see the entire space at once. Your vision is constantly fragmented by intervening columns that create an endless series of partial views and hidden alcoves. Here's something that will blow your mind about ancient construction techniques. Each of these columns was carved from multiple stone blocks, fitted together so precisely that the joints are nearly invisible, then covered with a thin layer of plaster that was painted in colors so vivid they still retain their intensity after 3 millennia. The Egyptians essentially invented modular construction, creating massive architectural elements that could be transported, assembled, and decorated with assembly line efficiency. Every surface tells stories through hieroglyphic texts and painted reliefs that create a visual encyclopedia of Egyptian religious and political thought. Gods process endlessly around column circumferences. Pharaohs present offerings to divine beings whose animal heads seem to track your movement through the hall, and celestial bark sail across stone skies populated with stars that map actual astronomical observations. The amount of information carved and painted here would require years to read completely, assuming you could decipher the complex religious symbolism that governs every decorative choice. The acoustics in this space defy rational explanation. Whispered conversations carry clearly across vast distances, while normal speech seems muffled and indistinct. Footsteps echo strangely, sometimes amplified to thunderous proportions, other times absorbed so completely they seem to vanish. The effect is profoundly disorienting, as if the hall itself controls which sounds deserve amplification and which should be suppressed for the comfort of divine residents. You find yourself unconsciously lowering your voice as you move deeper into the column forest, partly from reverence, but mostly from an inexplicable feeling that speaking normally would somehow violate the space's essential character. Other visitors seem to experience the same response. Conversations that were animated in the outer courtyard become subdued murmurs that blend with the constant background whisper of air moving through the forest of stone. Historians still argue whether the hypostyle hall was designed primarily for large religious gatherings or served as a covered processional route that allowed ceremonies to continue regardless of weather. The space could accommodate thousands of worshippers, but its segmented layout also creates intimate alcoves where smaller rituals could unfold simultaneously without interfering with each other. Priests move through the column maze with the confident navigation of people who've spent years learning its layout. They appear and disappear around stone pillars like religious ninjas, somehow always emerging exactly where they need to be for whatever ceremony or consultation is required. Their white linen robes flutter in the strange breezes that circulate through the hall, creating ghostly effects that add to the otherworldly atmosphere. The painted decorations reveal layers of meaning that reward careful examination. What initially appears to be simple religious imagery becomes increasingly complex as you study individual scenes. A pharaoh making offerings to gods turns out to be demonstrating specific theological points about divine kingship. Seemingly decorative plant motifs encode sophisticated astronomical observations. Even the color choices follow symbolic systems that communicate religious concepts to viewers educated enough to decode them. But here's what really gets fascinating from an engineering perspective. This massive roof, supported by those 134 columns, was constructed without any of the flying buttresses or other external supports that medieval European builders considered essential for large stone structures. The Egyptians achieved structural stability through mathematical precision and material engineering that modern architects still study for insights into large-scale construction techniques. Sunbeams slanting through the clerestory windows create a constantly changing light show on the painted walls and columns. As the sun moves across the sky, different reliefs are illuminated and shadowed in sequences that were clearly planned by the original designers. Certain scenes become visible only at specific times of day, creating a temporal dimension to the decorative program that rewards visitors who spend entire days in contemplation. You pause beside one of the massive central columns, craning your neck to examine the painted scenes that spiral around its circumference. The perspective is deliberately distorted to be viewed from ground level, with figures at the top appearing larger than those at the bottom to compensate for visual foreshortening. This sophisticated understanding of optical effects demonstrates that Egyptian artists combined spiritual devotion with practical knowledge of human perception. The floor beneath your feet tells its own story through wear patterns that reveal 3,000 years of ritual use. Smooth depressions mark spots where countless priests have stood during ceremonies, while other areas retain their original rough texture because they were considered too sacred for ordinary human traffic. The stone itself has become a record of human devotion, polished by generations of sandaled feet and prostrate bodies. As you move deeper into the hall, the outside world gradually disappears from consciousness. The sounds of the courtyard fade to whispers. The desert heat gives way to stone coolness, and the very quality of light changes from harsh desert glare to something softer and more mysterious. You're not just walking through a building. You're transitioning between different states of reality, moving from the mundane world of human concerns into a realm where cosmic forces operate according to divine logic. The inner sanctum's threshold stops you cold, not because of any physical barrier, but because every fiber of your being suddenly understands that you've reached the absolute limit of permissible trespass. Beyond this point lies the Holy of Holies, the naos where the god statue resides in splendid and terrifying isolation, tended only by the highest-ranking priests who have undergone purification so extensive they're barely recognizable as ordinary humans anymore. The very air here feels different, thicker, charged with an authority that makes your skin prickle and your breathing shallow. The doorway itself is a masterpiece of intimidation architecture. Massive granite blocks frame an opening that's proportioned to make any human feel appropriately insignificant, while the lintel overhead bears carved warnings and hieroglyphs that don't require translation to communicate their basic message. Proceed at your own spiritual peril. The door panels, when they're closed, are covered in precious metals and inlaid with gemstones that catch even the faintest light and throw it back in patterns that seem to move independently of your viewing angle. A priest emerges from the shadows beside the entrance. Not one of the junior clergy you've encountered elsewhere, but a senior officiant whose shaved head bears the distinctive scarification marks that indicate decades of advanced religious training. His white linen robes are so fine they seem to glow in the dim light, and the golden pectoral hanging from his neck depicts scenes of divine judgment that make your stomach clench involuntarily. When he speaks, his voice carries the particular authority of someone who genuinely believes he converses with gods on a regular basis. The sanctuary is forbidden to the uninitiated, he states matter-of-factly, but not unkindly. His tone suggests he's had this conversation countless times with pilgrims whose curiosity exceeded their spiritual clearance level. What you seek to witness is not meant for mortal eyes unprotected by proper consecration. The god's presence in his sanctuary is not a spectacle for the curious. It's a reality that could destroy the unprepared. Here's something that might surprise you about ancient Egyptian religious practice. The restriction on inner sanctuary access wasn't arbitrary gatekeeping. It was based on genuine belief that divine presence was literally dangerous to humans who hadn't undergone proper spiritual preparation. The god statue wasn't just a representation. It was considered the actual dwelling place of the deity, whose unfiltered presence could kill or drive mad anyone insufficiently protected by ritual purity. Through the partially open doorway, you catch tantalizing glimpses of the space beyond. The inner sanctuary is surprisingly small and intimate compared to the vast public areas you've traversed. Golden light flickers from oil lamps that burn continuously, their flames creating dancing shadows on walls covered with the most exquisite religious art you've ever seen. Every surface gleams with precious metals and rare pigments that cost more than most people earned in their lifetimes. The atmosphere inside the sanctuary pulses with an intensity that's almost physical. Incense smoke drifts in complex patterns that seem too organized to be random air currents, while the sound of chanting emerges periodically from depths you can't see. The acoustic properties have been carefully engineered to amplify certain frequencies while dampening others, creating an auditory environment that induces altered states of consciousness in those permitted to enter. You can just make out the edge of the god's shrine, a gilt wooden structure that houses the divine statue during its periods of rest between public appearances. The craftsmanship visible even from this distance is extraordinary, with inlaid precious stones creating patterns that seem to shift and change as the lamp flames flicker. This isn't furniture in any mundane sense. It's a cosmic anchor point where divine and mortal realms intersect under carefully controlled conditions. Historians still argue whether these inner sanctuaries were designed primarily for genuine religious experiences or elaborate theatrical productions that reinforced priestly authority through mystery and exclusion. The truth is probably more complex. The priests who manage these spaces likely experience genuine altered states while also understanding their political and social functions. The priest notices your obvious fascination with the forbidden space and offers what might be compassion or might be professional courtesy. The god travels forth from his sanctuary during the great festivals, he explains, when Amunias Ra processes through the temple and city in his golden bark. Then you may witness divine presence in forms appropriate for mortal perception. But here, in his private dwelling, he appears in his full glory, a sight that would burn away your human form like papyrus in flame. Behind the priest, you glimpse other figures moving in the sanctuary's depths. Senior clergy going about their divine maintenance duties with the casual efficiency of people who've spent decades in direct proximity to cosmic forces. They carry golden implements whose purposes you can only guess at, moving with the careful precision of individuals who know that a single mistake in sacred protocol could have catastrophic consequences. The air flowing from the sanctuary carries scents that seem impossible to identify. Not just incense and flowers, but something else, something that bypasses your rational mind and speaks directly to more primitive recognition systems. It's the smell of otherness, of space where normal physical laws operate under divine oversight, where thoughts and intentions carry weight that they lack in the mundane world. Carved guardian figures flank the doorway, their eyes inlaid with obsidian and precious stones that seem to track your movement with uncomfortable awareness. These aren't decorative elements. They're protective devices, spiritual security systems designed to prevent unauthorized entry while also serving as conduits for divine surveillance of the threshold area. Their expressions combine benevolence with barely contained destructive potential. The lighting effects within the sanctuary create an environment that exists somewhere between earthly architecture and celestial realm. Golden lamp flames reflect off polished metal surfaces, creating infinite recursive images that suggest space extending far beyond the chamber's physical dimensions. The visual effect is deliberately disorienting, designed to induce the altered consciousness states necessary for divine communion. As you stand at this ultimate threshold, you begin to understand that the entire temple complex has been leading to this moment. Not to grant you access, but to demonstrate the vast gulf between human curiosity and divine reality. Every previous space has been preparation for this final lesson in appropriate limitation. This recognition that some experiences require transformation so complete that they effectively end your existence as an ordinary human being. The priest's final words before he retreats into the sanctuary's depths carry the weight of absolute certainty. The God sees you, knows your heart, and judges your worthiness. Be content with this recognition, for it is more than most mortals ever receive. Divine presence is not entertainment. It's responsibility that few can bear without being consumed. The massive door panels swing shut with surprising silence, their precious metal surfaces reflecting your image back at you with golden distortion that makes you look like a stranger. You're left standing in the suddenly ordinary corridor outside, forever marked by proximity to ultimate mystery, while remaining permanently excluded from its deepest revelations. The temple's economic heart reveals itself as you follow a corridor lined with storage chambers, administrative offices, and workshops that hum with constant activity. This isn't the mystical realm of divine encounter. This is ancient Egypt's most sophisticated corporate headquarters, managing resources on a scale that would impress modern multinational corporations. The contrast with the sacred spaces you've just left is jarring, but illuminating. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were economic engines that drove entire regions of Egyptian civilization. The first workshop you encounter specializes in bread production on an industrial scale that defies your expectations about ancient capabilities. Massive ovens built into the stone walls can bake hundreds of loaves simultaneously, while grinding stations process grain in quantities that suggest they're feeding not just temple personnel, but significant portions of the surrounding population. The air is thick with flour dust and the yeasty smell of rising dough, punctuated by the rhythmic sounds of kneading and the sharp crack of wood splitting for oven fuel. Workers move through this space with the efficient coordination of people who've perfected their processes through generations of refinement. Master bakers oversee apprentices who handle specific tasks, measuring grain, tending fires, shaping loaves, monitoring fermentation, while scribes record production quantities on pottery shards and papyrus sheets. The level of organization would be impressive in any era, but in the ancient world, it represents logistic sophistication that few institutions could match. Here's something that might reshape your understanding of ancient Egyptian economy. Major temples like Karnak controlled agricultural land covering thousands of square miles, employed tens of thousands of workers, and managed supply chains that stretched across the known world. The temple system wasn't separate from Egypt's economy. It was the economy, processing everything from local grain harvest to luxury imports from Nubia, the Levant, and beyond. The brewery adjacent to the bakery operates with similar industrial efficiency, producing beer that serves as both payment for workers and offering for gods. The brewing process involves techniques that wouldn't be out of place in modern facilities. Controlled fermentation temperatures, quality testing, and standardized recipes that ensure consistent results. Egyptian beer was safer to drink than water, more nutritious than bread alone, and stable enough for long-term storage, making it the foundation of both nutrition and economics. Scribes stationed throughout these workshops maintain records with obsessive detail that would satisfy modern accountants. Every sack of grain, jar of oil, and bundle of flax is recorded multiple times by different clerks using cross-checking systems designed to prevent fraud. The hieroglyphic bookkeeping covers not just quantities, but also quality grades, source locations, and destination purposes. These aren't simple religious institutions. They're sophisticated businesses managing resources worth fortunes. The textile workshops occupy an entire wing of the complex, where skilled weavers produce linen of qualities ranging from coarse worker clothing to fabric so fine it's nearly transparent. The best pieces require months of work by master craftsmen whose techniques are closely guarded trade secrets passed down through family lines. The economic value of high-quality linen in the ancient world rivaled precious metals, making textile production a crucial temple revenue source. Livestock pens built into the temple's outer areas house cattle, sheep, goats, and poultry that provide protein, leather, and additional offerings for religious ceremonies. The animals are maintained by specialist herdsmen who understand breeding, nutrition, and veterinary care at levels that demonstrate sophisticated agricultural knowledge. Even a manure is carefully collected and processed for fertilizer, demonstrating the integrated efficiency of temple agricultural systems. Historians still argue whether temple economic activities were primarily profit-driven enterprises or religious obligations that happened to generate revenue. The distinction probably would have seemed artificial to ancient participants, who saw no contradiction between serving gods and managing earthly resources efficiently. Prosperity and piety were considered complementary rather than competing values. Granaries built with ingenious ventilation systems store surplus grain that serves as both economic cushion and famine insurance for surrounding communities. The storage technology prevents spoilage through controlled airflow and pest management techniques that keep grain viable for years. During bad harvest years, these temple reserves literally kept entire regions from starvation, cementing the temple's roles as both spiritual and practical community anchors. The administrative offices buzz with activity that mirrors modern corporate headquarters. Scribes draft contracts, calculate taxes, plan construction projects, and coordinate with other temples across Egypt. The paperwork, technically papyrus work, required to manage temple operations fills entire rooms with carefully organized archives. Literacy levels among temple personnel far exceeded those of the general population, making these institutions crucial repositories of knowledge and administrative expertise. Metalworking shops produce everything from ceremonial implements to practical tools, demonstrating mastery of techniques that wouldn't be matched elsewhere for centuries. Egyptian metallurgists understood alloy compositions, heat treatment, and decorative inlay work that created objects of stunning beauty and remarkable durability. The economic value of metal goods made these workshops significant revenue generators while also serving religious functions. Trading delegations arrive regularly from distant regions, bringing exotic materials in exchange for Egyptian manufactured goods and agricultural surplus. The temple serves as both destination and clearinghouse for international commerce, with priests who've mastered foreign languages and diplomatic protocols. These weren't isolated religious communities. They were cosmopolitan institutions connected to trade networks spanning the ancient world. The sheer scale of operations becomes overwhelming as you try to process the complexity of systems that coordinate all these activities. Resource allocation, personnel management, quality control, international relations, and religious observances must be balanced simultaneously by administrators who somehow make it all work seamlessly. The organizational sophistication rivals anything achieved in the modern world, but accomplished using technologies we consider primitive. As you observe these bustling workshops and offices, you realize that the mystical experiences in the temple's sacred areas are supported by economic realities of staggering complexity. Divine encounters require earthly foundations, and the priests who commune with gods also function as executives managing enterprises that would challenge modern business schools. The sacred and practical weren't separate realms. They were integrated aspects of institutions that served multiple community functions simultaneously. The festival day chaos hits you like a tsunami of sensory overload the moment you step into the transformed temple complex. What was yesterday a place of controlled reverence has exploded into a celebration that makes modern rock concerts look like quiet tea parties. Thousands of pilgrims from across Egypt pack every available space, their voices creating a wall of sound that seems to shake the massive stone columns. The air thrums with sistrum rattles, hand claps, drum beats, and ululating calls that blend into a sonic tapestry unlike anything in your experience. The god's golden bark emerges from the inner sanctuary carried on the shoulders of priests whose white robes have been replaced by ceremonial costumes that sparkle with precious metals and colorful fabrics. The portable shrine itself is a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship, carved wood covered in gold leaf, inlaid with semi-precious stones, and topped with divine symbols that catch the sunlight and throw it back in dazzling patterns. This isn't just a religious procession. It's a spectacular display of wealth and artistic achievement designed to overwhelm the senses and inspire awe. The crowd's reaction is immediate and overwhelming. People prostrate themselves as the divine bark passes, while others reach desperately toward the shrine, hoping to touch something that has been in the god's presence. The emotional intensity is palpable. Grown men weep openly. Women cry out in religious ecstasy, and children stare with wide eyes at what might be their first glimpse of divine power made manifest. This is faith expressed through mass hysteria, devotion channeled into collective celebration that borders on controlled chaos. Here's something that might surprise you about ancient Egyptian religious festivals. They weren't solemn, contemplative occasions like modern church services. They were community-wide parties that combined religious devotion with economic opportunity, social networking, and entertainment on scales that wouldn't be matched until modern times. Think Coachella meets Vatican City, if Vatican City had better beer and more colorful costumes. Vendors work the crowd with products specifically designed for festival consumption, special foods blessed for the occasion, miniature barks that replica the god's shrine, beer in decorated containers that serve as souvenirs, and flowers that pilgrims throw at the divine procession. The economic activity is staggering, with money changing hands at rates that suggest the entire Egyptian economy gets a significant boost from these religious celebrations. Musicians stationed throughout the complex provide soundtrack for the divine procession, their instruments ranging from simple flutes and drums to elaborate harps and lyres that require teams of players. The music isn't background accompaniment. It's an integral part of the religious experience, with specific rhythms and melodies that supposedly help divine presence manifest more effectively. The acoustic engineering of the temple complex amplifies certain frequencies while dampening others, creating sound effects that seem supernatural to participants. The procession route has been carefully planned to maximize both religious impact and crowd management. The god's bark travels through the temple's most impressive architectural spaces, pausing at significant shrines and altars where additional ceremonies unfold. Each stop creates focal points that draw crowd attention while preventing dangerous bottlenecks that could crush celebrants in the press of bodies. Dancing groups perform elaborate choreographed routines that tell religious stories through movement, their costumes and makeup transforming them into living representations of mythological characters. These aren't casual entertainers. They're trained specialists who've spent years mastering religious dance traditions that communicate theological concepts to audiences who might not be able to read hieroglyphic texts. The performances are simultaneously artistic achievements and educational tools. Priests managing the festival demonstrate organizational skills that would impress modern event planners. They coordinate security, crowd control, vendor management, and religious observances while maintaining the spiritual authenticity that give the entire celebration its meaning. The logistics of feeding, housing, and managing thousands of pilgrims for multi-day festivals require administrative sophistication that challenges assumptions about ancient organizational capabilities. Historians still argue whether these massive festivals were primarily religious expressions or political demonstrations designed to reinforce pharaonic authority through spectacular displays of wealth and organizational power. The answer is probably both. Egyptian rulers understood that religious devotion and political loyalty were so intertwined that separating them would have seemed artificial to contemporary participants. Food stalls offer festival specialties that range from simple bread and beer to elaborate delicacies that incorporate exotic spices and expensive ingredients. The social mixing that occurs around these food vendors breaks down normal class barriers as wealthy and poor alike crowd together seeking the same blessed nourishment. Festival eating becomes a temporary form of religious communism where shared divine favor matters more than economic status. The crowd includes representatives from across Egyptian society and beyond. Farmers from the Delta, merchants from Memphis, Nubian traders, Asiatic diplomats, and local residents who've been preparing for months. Festival time transforms the temple into a cosmopolitan gathering place where cultural exchange occurs alongside religious observance. Languages, fashions, and customs from across the ancient world create a diversity that rivals modern international events. Children weave through the crowd with the fearless enthusiasm of youth, their excited shrieks adding to the general cacophony while their parents try desperately to keep track of them in the press of bodies. Festival time is especially magical for young people who experience community celebration on scales that will shape their understanding of religion, society, and collective identity for the rest of their lives. As the day progresses and the festival reaches its climactic moments, you realize you're witnessing something that transcends simple religious observance. This is community identity expressed through shared ecstasy, cultural continuity maintained through collective celebration, and social cohesion reinforced through participation in experiences that connect participants to cosmic forces beyond individual understanding. The festival isn't just entertainment. It's the glue that holds Egyptian civilization together. The temple roof at midnight reveals secrets that daylight visitors never glimpse, transforming the familiar complex into an astronomical observatory where priest astronomers conduct humanity's most sophisticated investigation of celestial mechanics. Climbing the narrow stone staircase that spirals up through the temple's interior walls, you emerge onto a platform that offers breathtaking views of the desert night sky, unpolluted by artificial light, and so clear that the Milky Way appears as a river of stars flowing across the cosmic dome overhead. The priests working here move with quiet efficiency that contrasts sharply with the daytime bustle in the temple below. These aren't ordinary clergy, but specialist scholar priests who've devoted decades to mastering mathematical relationships between earthly and celestial events. Their equipment includes bronze instruments for measuring stellar positions, stone markers aligned with specific astronomical phenomena, and recording materials where they track celestial cycles with precision that won't be matched by European astronomy for another millennium. The head astronomer priest greets you with the weary friendliness of someone who spent too many nights staring at the sky and appreciates having someone to share his obsession. His hands are stained with ink from constant record-keeping, and his eyes hold the particular intensity of people who've discovered patterns in cosmic chaos that most humans never notice. When he speaks about the stars, his voice carries the reverence usually reserved for discussing gods, which from his perspective amounts to the same thing. The stars don't lie. He explains while adjusting a bronze instrument that tracks the movement of specific constellations across the sky. Kings may deceive, priests may err, but the celestial cycles continue with absolute reliability. Our job is to read divine intentions written in stellar movements and translate them into guidance for earthly activities. When a plant crops, when to hold festivals, when pharaohs should undertake military campaigns. All of this is revealed by those who know how to interpret cosmic language. Here's something that might revolutionize your understanding of ancient intellectual achievement. Egyptian astronomer priests developed mathematical models of celestial mechanics that enabled accurate prediction of eclipses, planetary positions, and seasonal changes centuries before similar knowledge emerged in Greek science. Their calendar system, based on careful observation of stellar cycles, was more accurate than the one used in Europe until the 16th century CE. The roof stone surface is carved with star maps that record thousands of years of accumulated observations. Their hieroglyphic annotations preserving astronomical knowledge that modern scholars are still working to decode completely. These aren't simple decorative patterns. They're sophisticated data storage systems that encode complex mathematical relationships between celestial and terrestrial cycles. The stone itself serves as a permanent library of cosmic knowledge. Measuring instruments scattered across the rooftop demonstrate technological sophistication that challenges assumptions about ancient capabilities. Bronze sighting devices enable precise measurement of stellar positions. Water clocks track time intervals with remarkable accuracy, and graduated scales allow calculation of celestial distances using trigonometric principles that supposedly weren't developed until much later in human history. The priest's work involves continuous data collection that requires both mathematical skill and religious dedication. They track the rising and setting positions of specific stars throughout the year, record the timing of planetary appearances, and correlate celestial events with earthly phenomena like Nile flood cycles and seasonal weather patterns. Their observations fill countless papyrus scrolls with numerical data that represents humanity's first systematic attempt to understand universal physical laws. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian astronomy was primarily practical science designed to support agricultural and administrative needs, or religious activity aimed at understanding divine communication through celestial signs. The distinction probably would have seemed meaningless to the priest astronomers, who saw no separation between scientific accuracy and religious truth. The night sky above ancient Egypt reveals celestial displays that modern light pollution has largely hidden from contemporary view. The Milky Way appears as a brilliant cosmic river that the Egyptians identified with divine barks, carrying gods across the heavenly realm. Planetary movements follow patterns that priest astronomers interpreted as divine communications requiring careful analysis and appropriate earthly responses. Collaborative work sessions involve multiple priests checking each other's calculations and observations, creating quality control systems that ensure astronomical accuracy. Mistakes in celestial interpretation could have serious consequences for agricultural planning and religious calendar management. so redundant verification procedures protect against errors that might disrupt the entire temple's operations. The integration of astronomical observation with religious calendar management demonstrates the sophisticated organizational thinking that characterized Egyptian temple operations. Festival timing, agricultural planning, administrative scheduling, and diplomatic activities all depend on accurate astronomical calculations that require years of careful preparation and constant fine-tuning based on ongoing observations. As dawn approaches and the stars begin fading in the growing light, you realize you've witnessed something extraordinary. The intersection of rigorous scientific method with profound religious devotion, conducted by individuals who understood cosmic relationships with mathematical precision while maintaining absolute faith in divine order. The priest astronomers aren't just ancient scientists or simple believers. They're something more complex, representatives of a worldview that integrated empirical observation with spiritual understanding in ways that modern minds struggle to comprehend. The morning star appears on the eastern horizon as the priest astronomers conclude their night's work, carefully recording final observations before returning to their daytime duties. Their transition from cosmic investigation to routine temple administration happens seamlessly, demonstrating how Egyptian civilization integrated multiple levels of knowledge and responsibility within individual careers that combined intellectual achievement with religious service. The priest beckons you toward a narrow staircase carved directly into the limestone floor, its steps worn smooth by countless sandaled feet over millennia. Remember that overwhelming incense from the inner sanctum? Well, prepare yourself. You're about to discover where they store enough frankincense to hotbox half of Memphis. The descent into the temple's underground crypts feels like entering the Earth's secret diary, where every shadow holds whispers of ancient mysteries. Your oil lamp flickers against walls lined with hieroglyphic inscriptions that seem to shimmer and dance in the unsteady light. The air grows noticeably cooler as you descend, a welcome relief from the desert heat above, though the atmosphere carries an almost tangible weight of sanctity. These aren't just storage rooms. They're the temple's beating heart, where the most precious artifacts sleep in darkness until called upon for sacred ceremonies. The first chamber opens before you like a pharaoh's fever dream come to life. Golden vessels catch your lamplight and throw it back in dazzling reflections that make the walls appear to pulse with their own inner fire. Here stands the temple's collection of ceremonial objects. Chalices carved from single blocks of granite, offering bowls inlaid with lapis lazuli that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, and incense burners shaped like mythical creatures with ruby eyes that seem to watch your every movement. Your guide explains in hushed tones that each object serves a specific divine purpose. That golden sistrum isn't just a fancy rattle. It's believed to recreate the sound of divine laughter, capable of driving away evil spirits with its musical vibrations. The obsidian mirrors don't just reflect faces. They're thought to reveal the truth of one's soul, which honestly sounds like the world's most terrifying self-help tool. Historians still argue whether these mirrors were used for divination or simply practical grooming, though given how obsessed ancient Egyptians were with the afterlife, smart money's on the mystical option. You notice elaborate wooden chests bound with copper and sealed with clay stamps bearing the temple's official marks. Inside these containers rest papyrus scrolls containing the most sacred religious texts, copies of the pyramid texts and coffin texts that guide souls through the treacherous journey of the afterlife. Some scrolls contain medical knowledge that won't be rediscovered by European physicians for another 1,000 years, including surprisingly accurate descriptions of surgical procedures and anatomical observations. The deeper chambers reveal even more wonders. Stone sarcophagi hold the mummified remains of sacred animals, ibises, cats, and even a few crocodiles that live their entire lives being pampered like furry or scaly pharaohs. One chamber contains row upon row of canopic jars, their carved heads representing the 4 sons of Horus who protect the deceased's internal organs. The craftsmanship is so exquisite that each face displays individual personality, as if the ancient artists captured the essence of these divine protectors in stone. Perhaps most intriguing are the sealed chambers your guide mentions, but doesn't open. These contain objects so sacred that only the high priest may view them, artifacts connected to the temple's founding or gifts from pharaohs whose names have been deliberately erased from history. Some chambers haven't been opened in living memory, their contents remaining mysterious even to the current priesthood. You can't help wondering what secrets lie behind those sealed doors. Lost technologies, forbidden knowledge, or simply really expensive furniture that nobody wants to dust. The storage system itself reveals the incredible organization of temple life. Everything is cataloged, inventoried, and stored according to strict religious protocols. Seasonal ceremonial objects are rotated like a divine clothing collection, with spring fertility symbols stored separately from harvest celebration items. The priests maintain detailed records of every object's history, its ritual applications, and the specific ceremonies where it's required. Your lamplight reveals one final surprise. Walls carved with protective spells and guardian figures designed to safeguard the treasures from both human thieves and supernatural threats. Hieroglyphic warnings promise terrible curses for anyone who disturbs the sacred objects, though you notice they're considerate enough to include instructions for proper handling procedures, suggesting ancient Egyptian priests understood the difference between malicious theft and legitimate religious use. As you prepare to ascend back toward the temple proper, you realize these crypts represent more than storage. They're the temple's memory made manifest, preserving not just objects, but the accumulated spiritual wealth of generations. Each vessel, scroll, and sacred statue represents humanity's persistent attempt to create something permanent in the face of mortality, to build bridges between the world of the living and the realm of the gods through carefully crafted beauty that transcends time itself. Your next destination leads you through corridors filled with distinctly different aromas. Instead of frankincense and myrrh, you catch whiffs of medicinal herbs, healing oils, and that unmistakable scent of carefully prepared remedies that somehow manages to smell both promising and slightly terrifying. Welcome to the temple's medical wing, where priest-physicians blend religious devotion with surprisingly sophisticated healthcare, creating what might be history's first faith-based medical practice that actually worked. The medical chambers occupy an entire section of the temple complex, their walls decorated with images of healing deities and detailed anatomical drawings that would make modern medical students weep with envy. Here, Thoth, the god of wisdom, shares wall space with Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of healing, creating a divine medical team that covers everything from broken bones to broken hearts. The priests here don't just pray for healing. They've spent years studying the human body with the dedication of modern researchers and the spiritual conviction of true believers. Your first encounter with a priest-physician immediately challenges any preconceptions about ancient medicine. This isn't some superstitious charlatan waving amulets over patients. This is a highly trained professional who's spent decades learning anatomy through mummification procedures, studying herbal properties through careful experimentation, and maintaining detailed medical records that would impress any modern hospital administrator. He wears the traditional white linen robe, but his hands bear the practical stains of someone who works with real patients facing real medical challenges. The treatment area reveals a fascinating blend of practical medicine and religious healing. Stone examination tables are carved with protective symbols and positioned to catch optimal light from strategically placed windows. Shelves line the walls containing hundreds of clay jars filled with medicinal preparations, ground beetle shells for digestive issues, honey mixed with copper salts for wound treatment, and willow bark extract that contains the same active ingredient found in modern aspirin. Historians still argue whether Egyptian physicians understood the scientific principles behind their remedies or simply relied on empirical observation. But frankly, when your head stops pounding, you probably don't care about the theory. You observe a typical consultation as a patient arrives complaining of persistent stomach pain. The priest-physician begins with what modern doctors would recognize as a thorough medical history, asking detailed questions about diet, sleep patterns, and family health. But then the process takes a distinctly Egyptian turn as he examines the patient's pulse not just for rate and rhythm, but because ancient Egyptian medicine believed different pulse patterns revealed the condition of various internal organs. It's like taking someone's pulse and claiming you can diagnose their personality. Ambitious, potentially useful, and absolutely fascinating to watch. The diagnostic process includes examining the patient's breath, checking the color and clarity of their urine, and palpating various body parts while murmuring prayers to Imhotep, the deified architect who became Egypt's patron saint of medicine. The priest-physician then consults papyrus scrolls containing detailed medical texts. These aren't just collections of folk remedies, but sophisticated medical manuals describing surgical procedures, anatomical observations, and treatment protocols based on centuries of accumulated medical knowledge. Treatment combines practical intervention with spiritual healing in ways that would make modern holistic practitioners jealous. The prescribed remedy includes a carefully prepared herbal mixture, ground coriander, cumin, and honey dissolved in beer, which honestly sounds better than most modern cough syrups, but also specific prayers to be recited while taking the medicine, protective amulets to wear during recovery, and detailed dietary instructions that reveal sophisticated understanding of nutrition and digestion. The surgical capabilities of these priest-physicians would genuinely surprise you. They perform cataract surgery using bronze instruments, set broken bones with wooden splints and linen bandages, and even attempt basic neurosurgery for head injuries. One papyrus describes removing arrow points from wounded soldiers, treating battlefield injuries with remarkable success rates, considering the complete absence of antibiotics or modern anesthesia. Pain management relies heavily on opium poppy extract and alcohol, administered with religious ceremonies designed to invoke divine assistance during procedures. The temple's medical school trains new generations of priest-physicians through rigorous apprenticeships lasting several years. Students learn anatomy by assisting with mummification procedures, gaining hands-on knowledge of human internal structure that European physicians won't acquire for another millennium. They memorize extensive pharmacological knowledge, which plants treat which conditions, how to prepare tinctures and salves, and the proper prayers to accompany each treatment. The curriculum includes mathematics for calculating dosages, astronomy for timing treatments according to favorable celestial conditions, and rhetoric for explaining medical concepts to patients and their families. Perhaps most impressive is the temple's medical record-keeping system. Patient histories are maintained on papyrus scrolls. Treatment outcomes are documented for future reference, and successful remedies are shared between temples throughout Egypt. This creates a medical knowledge network that spans the entire kingdom, allowing innovations and discoveries to spread rapidly through professional consultation rather than random word-of-mouth transmission. The sound of young voices reciting in unison draws you toward another section of the temple complex, where the rhythmic chanting reveals one of ancient Egypt's most crucial institutions. The temple school where future scribes, priests, and administrators receive the education that will ultimately run an entire civilization. Remember that complex hieroglyphic writing system that decorates nearly every surface? Well, somebody has to teach the next generation how to read and write those thousands of individual symbols, and apparently, it takes about as much patience as you'd expect. The classroom occupies a spacious courtyard partially shaded by palm trees, where rows of young boys sit cross-legged on woven mats with wooden writing boards balanced on their knees. Their ages range from roughly 7 to 16, and their expressions reveal the universal student experience, some eager and attentive, others clearly wondering why they couldn't have been born into families that herd goats instead of pursuing literacy. The teacher, an elderly priest with the kind of authoritative presence that suggests he's explained the difference between hieroglyphic and hieratic script roughly 10,000 times, moves between students with surprising energy for someone whose back probably hasn't been straight since the previous dynasty. The educational system here represents one of humanity's earliest experiments in mass literacy, though mass remains relative when only a tiny percentage of Egypt's population can afford to send their sons to temple schools. These boys represent the future administrative class, the scribes who will keep tax records, the priests who will perform religious ceremonies, and the officials who will help pharaohs maintain control over this vast, complex kingdom. No pressure, kids, but civilization literally depends on your ability to memorize several thousand different symbols while sitting on a hard stone floor for hours at a time. Your observation begins during handwriting practice, where students copy hieroglyphic texts onto pieces of broken pottery called ostraca. The teacher emphasizes proper brush technique, explaining that sloppy hieroglyphs don't just look bad. They can actually change meanings and potentially offend gods who take accurate spelling very seriously. One student struggles with a complex symbol for water, which requires precisely 8 wavy lines arranged in perfect parallel formation. Get it wrong, and you might accidentally write beer instead, which could lead to some very confused religious ceremonies. The curriculum extends far beyond basic writing skills. Students learn mathematics using problems that reflect real administrative challenges, calculating grain storage capacity, determining tax obligations based on Nile flood levels, and computing the materials needed for temple construction projects. The mathematical system combines practical arithmetic with religious significance, since numbers themselves are believed to possess divine properties. Historians still argue whether Egyptian mathematical achievements stemmed from practical necessity or mystical beliefs about numerical harmony. Though watching these students wrestle with fraction problems suggests necessity probably won the debate. Geography lessons utilize detailed maps showing Egypt's position within the known world, emphasizing the kingdom's central role in international trade and diplomatic relations. Students memorize the names and locations of foreign lands, learning to identify products and peoples from Nubia, Syria, and the mysterious lands beyond the Great Sea. The teacher describes exotic places with the enthusiasm of someone who's clearly never traveled beyond Memphis, but has read every available scroll about distant kingdoms, where people supposedly have bizarre customs like drinking fermented grape juice instead of beer. Religious education forms the core of temple school curriculum, with students spending hours each day learning hymns, prayers, and ritual procedures. They study creation myths, divine genealogies, and the complex relationships between different gods and goddesses. Advanced students learn to interpret religious symbols and understand the theological principles underlying various ceremonies. The teacher explains that religious knowledge isn't just academic study. It's practical job training for careers that require direct interaction with divine forces. Literature classes introduce students to classic Egyptian texts, including adventure stories, moral instruction tales, and romantic poetry that reveals ancient Egyptians were just as obsessed with love songs as any modern teenagers. Students practice reading aloud with proper dramatic emphasis, learning to perform text during religious ceremonies or royal court entertainment. One popular text describes the adventures of Sinuhe, an Egyptian who fled to foreign lands and eventually returned home, providing geography lessons, cultural observations, and probably the world's first adventure novel all wrapped into one convenient scroll. Advanced students begin specialized training based on their intended careers. Future temple priests learn additional religious texts and ceremonial procedures. Prospective government scribes study legal codes and administrative procedures. Those destined for royal service receive training in court protocols and diplomatic correspondence. The education becomes increasingly practical as students prepare to take their places in Egypt's complex bureaucratic system. The discipline system would make modern educators nervous. Corporal punishment is standard practice, with the teacher wielding a wooden rod that sees regular use when students fail to meet expectations. However, successful students receive genuine praise and small rewards. creating a competitive atmosphere that pushes everyone toward higher achievement. The teacher frequently reminds students that literacy represents their pathway to prosperity and social advancement, transforming them from ordinary workers into members of Egypt's educated elite. Physical education includes swimming instruction in the Nile, basic military training with wooden weapons, and athletic competitions that build strength and coordination. Students learn that healthy bodies support sharp minds, and that future administrators need physical stamina to handle demanding careers. The holistic approach combines intellectual, spiritual, and physical development in ways that wouldn't seem out of place in modern educational theory. The entire temple complex suddenly buzzes with electric anticipation as word spreads through corridors and chambers like wildfire. The pharaoh approaches. Remember that sense of divine presence you felt throughout your temple journey? Well, multiply that by about 10,000 because you're about to witness the arrival of someone who literally claims to be a living god, and everyone from the high priest to the newest altar boy absolutely believes it. The air itself seems to thicken with reverence as preparations begin for a royal visit that will transform this already sacred space into the epicenter of earthly divine power. Your guide quickly ushers you to a position where you can observe without interfering, explaining in hushed, urgent tones that witnessing a pharaoh's temple ceremony represents one of the most sacred experiences available to mortal humans. The pharaoh doesn't just visit temples. He transforms them into cosmic powerhouses where heaven and earth literally intersect through his divine presence. This isn't political theater or royal pageantry. This is the fundamental ritual that maintains universal order and prevents cosmic chaos from destroying everything you've ever known or loved. The sound reaches you first, a rhythmic beating of drums, the clear notes of silver trumpets, and the measured chanting of priests announcing the divine approach. Through the temple's main entrance comes a procession that makes every previous ceremony you've witnessed look like amateur hour. Standard bearers carry golden emblems of pharaonic power, their polished surfaces catching sunlight and throwing brilliant reflections across temple walls. Incense bearers swing elaborate censers that fill the air with clouds of frankincense, so thick you can practically taste the divine presence they're meant to invoke. The pharaoh himself appears like something from mythology made manifest in human form. His ceremonial regalia transforms him from mere mortal into walking divinity. The double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt towering above his head, the false beard of divine kingship extending from his chin, and the elaborate collar of gold and precious stones that catches light like captured starfire. His skin gleams with sacred oils, and his eyes are lined with kohl that creates the iconic Egyptian royal appearance you've seen in countless tomb paintings. But seeing it in person, witnessing the way he moves with absolute confidence in his divine nature, makes those artistic depictions seem like pale shadows of overwhelming reality. The ceremony begins with the pharaoh's purification ritual, performed with water from the sacred lake and oils blessed by the high priest. This isn't just symbolic cleansing. It's believed to activate the divine essence within the royal person, transforming him from Horus on earth into a fully realized God capable of communicating directly with the cosmic forces that govern reality. The high priest performs each action with meticulous precision, understanding that any mistake could disrupt the delicate balance between human and divine realms. You watch as the pharaoh approaches the inner sanctum where the god's statue resides, entering spaces so sacred that even high priests require special purification before crossing the threshold. The pharaoh performs the daily ritual of awakening, feeding and clothing the divine statue. But when he does it, the ceremony takes on cosmic significance. His actions don't just serve the temple god. They maintain Ma'at, the fundamental principle of truth and order that prevents the universe from collapsing into primordial chaos. No pressure, but literally everything depends on him getting this right. The offerings presented during a royal visit exceed anything you've previously witnessed. Golden vessels overflow with the finest foods, precious stones glitter like captured starlight, and exotic incense creates aromatic clouds that seem to lift prayers directly toward divine realms. The pharaoh presents these gifts not as tribute, but as cosmic maintenance. Feeding the gods maintains their strength to continue governing universal forces. Historians still argue whether pharaohs genuinely believe in their divine nature or simply used religious authority for political control. But watching this ceremony, you realize the distinction becomes meaningless when everyone involved treats the ritual with absolute spiritual conviction. The pharaoh's pronouncements during the ceremony carry the weight of divine decree. His words don't just express wishes or intentions. They literally reshape reality through divine authority. When he proclaims prosperity for Egypt, abundance for the harvest, or victory over enemies, he's not making promises or predictions. He's exercising godlike power to make these things happen through cosmic force of will. The assembled priests respond with reverent affirmation, understanding that they're witnessing divine legislation that governs natural laws. The ceremony concludes with the pharaoh receiving divine blessing from the god statue, symbolically renewed in his divine authority and cosmically recharged for another period of earthly rule. The high priest anoints him with sacred oils while reciting prayers that confirm his divine status and invoke continued divine support for his earthly reign. The pharaoh emerges from the inner sanctum glowing with renewed divine energy, his presence so overwhelming that even hardened priests bow low in genuine reverence. As the royal procession prepares to depart, you realize you've witnessed something far beyond political ceremony or religious pageantry. You've observed the fundamental ritual that ancient Egyptians believed literally maintained cosmic order, performed by someone who genuinely embodied divine authority in human form. The pharaoh doesn't just rule Egypt. He serves as the crucial link between heaven and earth, maintaining universal balance through ceremonies so sacred that witnessing them changes your understanding of power, divinity, and the relationship between human ambition and cosmic responsibility. The eastern horizon begins to blush with the faintest suggestion of dawn as you find yourself walking slowly toward the temple's main entrance, your sandaled feet carrying you through corridors that have witnessed the accumulated devotion of countless generations. The overwhelming sensory bombardment of your temple journey, the intense incense, the gleaming gold, the chanted prayers, the mysterious rituals, gradually softens into something deeper and more profound, settling into your consciousness like sediment in still water. Your mind processes experiences that seem almost too vast for human comprehension, memories that will reshape your understanding of humanity's relationship with the divine for the rest of your days. The great columns of the hypostyle hall frame your exit like massive stone guardians bidding farewell to a visitor who has glimpsed secrets normally reserved for priests and pharaohs. Remember that initial moment when you first stepped into this sacred space, overwhelmed by the sheer scale and majesty of human ambition carved into stone. Now those same columns feel almost familiar, their hieroglyphic messages less mysterious and more like conversations with old friends who speak in symbols instead of words. The morning light filtering through clear-story windows catches the carved reliefs at different angles, revealing details you missed during your nighttime exploration and reminding you that even a most thorough visit barely scratches the surface of this architectural encyclopedia. Your footsteps echo differently now in the gradually emptying corridors as the temple prepares for another day of regular religious routine. The priests you encounter move with the quiet efficiency of people whose lives follow rhythms established centuries before their births, checking sacred flames, preparing morning offerings, and beginning the daily cycle of rituals that maintain cosmic order. Their presence no longer seems mysterious or intimidating. Instead, you recognize them as dedicated professionals whose spiritual work keeps the universe functioning properly, which honestly seems like a pretty important job when you think about it. The sacred lake reflects the growing light like a mirror of polished silver, its surface disturbed only by the gentle movements of sacred fish and the occasional water bird. The purification pools where you witnessed cleansing ceremonies now lie still and peaceful, waiting for the day's first ritual ablutions. The entire temple complex settles into the contemplative quiet of early morning, when the boundary between night's mysteries and day's practical activities dissolves into something timeless and deeply peaceful. As you approach the massive pylons that guard the temple's entrance, their towering presence no longer feels overwhelming, but somehow comforting, like protective walls that have sheltered sacred mysteries through dynasties of pharaohs, foreign invasions, and the endless cycle of human ambition and mortality. The carved reliefs depicting divine victories and royal ceremonies catch the horizontal rays of dawn light, transforming static stone into dynamic storytelling that bridges the gap between human experience and divine legend. Stepping beyond the temple's sacred precinct feels like crossing from one world into another, leaving behind the concentrated spiritual intensity of consecrated space and entering the ordinary world where people worry about harvest yields, tax obligations, and whether their children will find good marriages. The contrast hits you with surprising force, not unpleasant, but profound, like waking from an incredibly vivid dream only to realize that regular reality continues unchanged despite your transformative experience. The desert air carries different scents now, less incense and sacred oils, more dust and distant cooking fires as the nearby settlement begins stirring with morning activities. The transition from sacred to secular happens gradually, allowing your consciousness to adjust slowly to the reduced spiritual intensity of ordinary life. You realize that the temple doesn't exist in isolation, but serves as the spiritual heart of a living community, drawing its significance from the people whose devotion and labor make its continued existence possible. Walking away from the temple complex, you find yourself looking back repeatedly, watching as the rising sun illuminates those massive stone structures with golden light that makes them seem to glow from within. The experience of witnessing humanity's most ambitious attempt to create permanent connection with divine forces leaves you changed in ways you are still beginning to understand. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian religion represented sophisticated theology or elaborate superstition. But after walking through spaces where generations of people poured their deepest spiritual longing into stone and ritual, such academic distinctions seem almost beside the point. The memories settle into your consciousness like layers of sediment, forming geological strata. The overwhelming grandeur of sacred architecture, the intimate intensity of religious ceremonies, the dedicated professionalism of priests and scribes, the complex integration of spiritual and practical concerns that governed every aspect of temple life. You've witnessed humanity's persistent attempt to transcend mortality through creating something permanent and sacred, to build bridges between earthly experience and cosmic mystery, using nothing but stone, gold, incense, and absolute devotion. As the temple disappears behind you, and the ordinary world reclaims your attention, you carry within yourself the profound silence that follows overwhelming experience. The contemplative quiet that comes after witnessing something far larger than individual human concerns, something that connects your brief existence to the vast sweep of cosmic time and divine mystery, reminding you that even in our modern world, the human spirit continues reaching toward transcendence with the same longing that once raised these magnificent monuments from desert sand. And so your journey through the ancient Egyptian temple draws to its gentle close, like the last notes of a sacred hymn fading into blessed silence. The memories you carry feel almost too rich for ordinary consciousness. Golden vessels catching lamplight in hidden crypts, the rhythmic chanting of young scribes learning hieroglyphs, the overwhelming presence of divine authority made manifest in living pharaohs, and the quiet dedication of priests whose daily rituals maintain cosmic order through generation after generation of human devotion. Let these images settle softly into your mind like sediment in still water, each experience finding its proper place in the vast archive of human spiritual longing. The temple you visited exists now only in ruins and archaeological fragments, but the profound human impulse that created it, our eternal reaching toward transcendence, our deep need to create meaning through beauty and ritual, our persistent belief that mortal lives can touch something immortal, continues burning as brightly today as it did when those massive pylons first rose from desert sand. Feel your breathing slow and deepen as you release the intensity of ancient mysteries and allow yourself to drift toward peaceful rest. The overwhelming sensory experiences of your temple journey fade into gentle background whispers, distant incense, soft chanting, the rustle of linen robes moving through sacred corridors. Your mind processes these profound encounters at its own pace, integrating glimpses of divine mystery into the comfortable rhythms of ordinary consciousness. The desert silence embraces you now like an old friend, vast and peaceful and timeless, carrying you gently towards sleep where dreams and memories blend into something deeper than both. Rest well, knowing you've witnessed humanity's most beautiful attempt to touch eternity through stone and prayer and absolute devotion. The ancient mysteries keep their vigil while you surrender to blessed, dreamless peace. Sweet dreams.